Hello and welcome to podcast number 2 with What is Universe. I'm James Murphy, the editor of the magazine, the online magazine, and I have with me, as with last time, Robert Sugar, who was the CEO at Crocotta R&D and the founder and the proprietor of the magazine. I've got to say it's been a very promising week in terms of response to the first podcast. There has been some specific feedback, which I found quite funny. A number of people asked, how was it that I could work in a reference to Timothy Dalton in a podcast that's nominally about science, even science fiction? Well, to the sci-fi fans out there, I would say Dalton has done science fiction. He was in Flash Gordon, which is a sci-fi film, so technically he qualifies. And in terms of science fact, without being flippant about this, his 2 Bond movies are examples of excellent filmmaking. They certainly have drawbacks. The budget clearly is a lot tighter on those. But if you consider what they did on the budgets they were given, the sheer attention to detail and the action is very much up on the screen. So remembering that filmmaking is a science, and that's the connection between, I think, filmmaking and science generally. You can't make a movie unless you can edit, unless you can plan, unless you can choreograph, unless you can very specifically, divvy up budgets and stuff. So consider that The Living Daylights and License to Kill, which are great pulp movies, even if they're not, they're good movies, even if they're not good Bond movies specifically, are incredibly well directed at that action level, which is science. John Glenn, who directed them, was one of the greatest second unit directors and editors of all time. And I think Dalton is very much like the lost Laurence Olivier that we almost had. I was then asked about how I managed to work in references to Gwyneth Paltrow and Léa Seydoux. Well, I would like to apologise for that, but I'm not going to. I think that art, beauty, science, wonder, they all go together, and one can't really reference Iron Man without his lovely assistant, Pepper Potts. And in terms of the new Bond movie, Spectre, Léa Seydoux is in it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will try and minimise my references to either my favourite actors or actresses du jour. Actually, that's a big fat lie. I will end up mentioning all of them probably again, just to make sure that you're still listening. Anyway, this week the theme is the apocalypse, the end of the world. Now, our most successful articles in terms of hits so far, and in terms of marketability, have been to do with scientific responses to the end of the world. Can science somehow predict what's going to happen? And above all, I suppose, can science prevent some world-ending disaster? But then the third possibility, which I think is where, once again, the science fiction element invades, and pleasantly so, is could science actually cause the end of the world? Could there be some progression in science that is so devastating, so beyond our control, and which we have arrogantly imposed on the world, that it actually destroys us, wipes us out, be it in one event or in a sequence of events that somehow, degenerates our capacity to survive and coexist with each other as civilized citizens. And it's that sort of thing which I think is the basis of a lot of fiction, but frighteningly so, I think we take it for granted almost in science fact as well, that there are some areas of science that can hinder as much as help, and that we have to be very vigilant, both in how science can help us, but also about how science could potentially wipe us out. So we're going to go through as many of the apocalypse eventualities as we've addressed in the article as possible. That could take us into 2 podcasts rather than 1, because we know you haven't got 6 hours to go through all of them. Lovely though that would be. And yes, there'll be cinema references along the way, but as ever, I've got Robert with me to inject some science fact into it. Now, the word apocalypse, as I understood it, and I think when I was doing the first draft, if you think back, Robert, was I was going to take quite a philosophical approach. And we had this debate, which is that, for me, apocalypse was simply the word reveal or revelation. Do you remember that? Robert, you hear that?
Absolutely, yes. I'm here.
And I think it was you that said, well, that's all very well and good, James, but that kind of philosophical approach, the word apocalypse, to even people who are philosophers accept that in common parlance every day, if we talk about an apocalyptic event, we don't mean something is revealed. We mean the end of the world. To the extent that the word Armageddon and apocalypse are now one and the same. Is that how you understand apocalypse? That it has to be, bang, boom, end of the world stuff?
Well, I think we are talking about 2 different definitions here. Armageddon, as I know, is rather the final battle between evil and good, simply. But Apocalypse is the end of Earth and our civilization as we know it, or one civilization. Let me tell you an example, because these two things actually can exist and operate without the other. An apocalypse it can be caused by an asteroid impact, for instance. If we look at the dinosaurs, then our best theory so far is that about 66 million years ago, a massive asteroid hit Earth, and that caused rapid and global climate change, which basically led to the complete extinction of the dinosaurs. So that was kind of an apocalypse for them.
And by extension, one could have asteroid impacts that are not world-destroying. I mean, it is entirely possible that any kind of bit of junk from space that hits the Earth could be pretty innocuous, wouldn't do much damage at all.
That's right. Our planet is being bombarded and hit every day by asteroids, tiny little rocks, dust, whatsoever is out there in space. Just too tiny and meaningless that can have any global impact on us.
So what is the chance then of, in the movie Armageddon, and also the movie Deep Impact, it's a typical Hollywood trend, this, whereby one particular script trend gets very hot overnight, and one studio is racing out a picture about it, and then the next studio races in to compete. So in 1998, which was, as I remember it, a pretty abysmal year certainly for the blockbuster. I don't remember the summer being particularly good that year for movies. But they had Deep Impact, which was one way of saying that, look, we're never going to beat the asteroid. It's unbeatable. We have to learn, I suppose, how to cope with it, rather than how to defeat it. I mean, yes, they do, as I recall, send a team up into space. But really, the mechanics of that movie was really just about, I suppose, how humanity would respond to it. Whereas, if you contrast that with Armageddon, which was the big summer blockbuster that year, they did have a solution. And the solution, I think, was... well, let me get this straight. It's once again, it overlaps with what we did last week on the pseudoscience. But the idea was that they have this big exposition scene at the beginning. And there's a scientist played by Jason Isaacs. Now, Jason Isaacs is very convincing as professionals or academics. He was a law graduate before he became an actor. And I think that adds to his abilities as an actor. It makes him that bit more convincing. But he gives this mini lecture to the NASA and political bods that are around the table. And he says, look, if you fire a nuke at this global killer asteroid, it will do absolutely nothing. It will simply, at best, maybe disrupt the trajectory very briefly. It will not destroy the asteroid, it will not prevent the collision. But if you go up there and you drill into the asteroid and you put the nukes inside the asteroid somehow, you will implode from within as well as explode, and thereby prevent this, as they call it, Armageddon, as we would call it, perhaps Apocalypse. They've got it wrong, I think, in terms of a title. But perhaps the movie Apocalypse had a domain name or whatever had already been booked. But the point is, the world is faced with complete annihilation, total destruction, and they have a scientific, or once again, and to overlap with the last week, pseudoscientific solution. Now, what they do is they actually, in a very convoluted plot, they hire a team of deep sea oil drillers, kind of a band of, on the one hand, rednecks, on the other hand, academics themselves, led by Bruce Willis. And this was Bruce Willis at the beginning of his, I suppose, period of playing quite grumpier, elder statesman action heroes, rather than the kind of the John McClane wisecracking, more likable sort. There's still elements of that. Like, he has a scene with NASA who goes, "Are you telling me that this is the best thing that the United States government could come up with? A piss poor solution." But my question to you, Robert, would be, is that in any way possible? I mean, film critics pointed out, wouldn't it be a lot easier, even if that were the solution, to simply train a gang of astronauts in how to drill, rather than train a gang of drillers in how to be astronauts? But that aside, the principle of drilling into an asteroid to put the nuke inside it, rather than firing a nuke at it, I think, is there anything to that? Is that credible, doable, physically accurate?
Well, read about this topic was rather different methods actually, because obviously the asteroid danger, the danger of possible impact, it's something already the space agencies are dealing with. But they have more simple plans than just shooting on the asteroid, because it's more simple. Actually, you just need to change the trajectory of the asteroid using gravity, some extra thrusters attached to the asteroid instead of any drilling, and just change the trajectory, and then it's going to miss Earth.
Yeah. So the on principle, it's not impossible. I mean, it's not total fantasy as a solution.
The drilling.
Yeah.
I don't think that drilling is necessary. I don't think drilling is an efficient way to basically protect our planet against an asteroid impact.
No, but the idea, the physics, if you like, of the idea that if we simply fire a nuke at it, that would be spectacularly unhelpful and unreliable. That is accurate. So even though their solution
very unreliable.
But the problem that they've identified is accurate, even though the solution that they come up with is complete nonsense. Yeah, is that a fair way of putting it?
Pretty much that's the case. Yeah, that's a typical Hollywood scenario, rather.
Yeah, no, totally. And you know, I mean, the thing is, it's a movie that is incredibly long. They really, you know, you could do that movie in about an hour and a half. You could literally just have the setup at the beginning, but they draw it out, and it's there's lots of kind of sentimental moments and, you know, sort of almost soap operatics thrown in. And there's the inevitable fight scene that has to come in because there has to be, you know, a breakdown in military protocol, and there has to be a lot of, you know, effing and blinding, and there has to be a scene in a strip club apropos nothing, and, you know, stuff like that. And there have to be lots of meta references to Star Wars and Pulp Fiction and whatnot thrown in. I mean, it's one of those messy summer blockbuster movies, but it did impress me in the sense that they had at least thought about the more academic side of things, because they don't need to do that. And as a movie that's much maligned and easily slagged off, I think on that score, the idea that you have academic debate about how to solve problems is quite accurate. Is it fair to say that the scientific community take asteroid collision seriously then? I mean, is there a debate about it, about how to deal with it? Is it something that physicists and astrophysicists talk about, or is it something that they shy away from?
No, it's absolutely serious. That's absolutely a hot topic, and as said, the big space agencies are really dealing with this problem, because it's really just a question of time when the next big large asteroid is going to hit Earth, and I guess mankind needs to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And if we go back to Deep Impact for a second, I mean, one of the things that does address is mankind's, as I say, emotional response to it, and the politics of it. There's very much a political dimension to that film. It's directed by a lady called Mimi Leder. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And she was very good at directing science in film. She cut her teeth doing ER. Did you ever watch? Do you know ER, the old medical drama on American TV, which launched the career
of... yes, I do.
Well, it's certainly in its first few seasons. I mean, I stopped watching ER when George Clooney left, and I think one of the reasons I stopped watching... I mean, Clooney, it was. I still think it's one of Clooney's finest hours. I don't think he ever really topped it in terms of sheer acting. He was very convincing as a doctor. You see so many television shows where the doctors are unconvincing, but he was utterly convincing. And she subsequently directed him in a film called The Peacemaker, where once again the science of bomb disposal, of defusing a nuke, is dealt with. So it was only natural that Deep Impact would deal with both the political and the scientific dimensions of it. It doesn't quite give us the reassurances of Armageddon about how to solve it, but I think both movies do have that serious sense that this is something that could happen. This is not in the realm of science fiction. Obviously, you're watching it as a piece of entertainment, but it's a serious worry. So, what's the problem with it? I mean, is it funding? Is it? I mean, the fact that we don't hear very much about it. I mean, is it something that perhaps we just lack money to deal with or to plan for? Is there a lack of political will to sort of look? We have enough worries with the state of the economy and the state of dealing with very terrestrial threats like ISIS. We don't need to worry about asteroid collision. Is very low down the list.
Yeah, actually, asteroid collision is not an immediate threat, so probably there's lack of funding, and it's not a priority. However, it's a serious threat. As we know, it did happen in the past, and it's going to happen several times in the future. Scientists have, of course, lots of telescopes, space telescopes, ground-based telescopes. They are monitoring nearby objects or any basically object that's trajectory is too close to Earth. However, it's still far from 100% coverage to track all these objects. So definitely more funding would help, because first you have to identify, I guess, these objects from the distance, because then actually it would be quite easy. And well, I'm not into the space business that much. However, it sounds relatively easy, and based on current technology, it's absolutely doable to send there, let's say, a thruster, even just remote control thruster, and just to change the trajectory of such an asteroid.
I mean, there has been some political lobbying for this. I mean, there's you follow UK politics, and one of the guys who did talk about this was a guy called Lembert Opik, and he was a Liberal Democrat. I think no one's perfect, but he and I think the media kind of made him into a sort of a professional quiz show attender and a bit of a sort of a part-time comedian almost, but he was very serious in his lobbying about this matter, and he was saying, look, this isn't some far-fetched, silly notion to waste money. This is a very credible, important point, and I think one of the points that he made, and that NASA make, I think, as well, when they're looking for more funding, is that, look, even if this doesn't happen, if we invest even a slightly larger amount than we're doing at the moment, that's enough to at least take it seriously, to the extent that if it did happen, we've got not only options on the table, but options in place that are ready to go. And second, the amount of research put into that's worth doing in itself, because by addressing a threat or a problem, you're commissioning new research, you're inspiring new thought, and you're driving the course of science forward. And it gets kids interested as well. Kids love. I mean, I'm a teacher in my other guys, and kids love the end of the world. They're fascinated by it, and that threat could be the thing that gets a kid who's not, the hottest student on physics to maybe take more of an interest in it. And okay, it's not going to convert every student overnight, but I think if science is presented certainly more as something that's about problem solving and about these sort of end of the world situations and preventing those, you've got to weigh in from media and from art back into the science to at least make it more accessible and interesting. So even if we don't get wiped out by an asteroid, I think its very threat could be in its way almost something useful. And I mean, if we were to do this on a scale, say 10 is it's definitely going to kill us, wipe us out, and it's coming soon, and 1 is this is complete Hollywood fantasy, where would asteroids be at? Roughly. And I know I can't ask you to predict the future, that's not what this is about, but just, if you were a gambling man.
It's really difficult to answer the question, because, theoretically, nobody knows about any identified asteroid targeting Earth at the moment, but actually that could change in the next years. That finally scientists just the observers track one object, and then actually we are having the problem already, or it could take another 500 to 5,000 years, and nothing really will even get close to Earth. So it's really difficult to predict when this possibility turns into an immediate threat, but it's there. It's a serious thing, and I agree that actually politicians and everyone should take this more seriously, because this is such a threat which could be and can be eliminated based on contemporary technology already, unlike some other threats which, don't even the theoretical physicists can properly define or deal with.
Mm-hmm. Well, that moves us neatly on then to the next threat, and I think one of the ones that I looked at, and I in the article I think I kind of put them together, was earthquakes and volcanoes. These are things that, once again, are they jump into the news. We think of them as something very much, I think, in history, or once again in the realm of science fiction, and then out of nowhere, bang, they just erupt, if you'll pardon the pun. They just come out of nowhere. And was there an earthquake in the East Midlands last week? Is that true? I think I posted that on the website. Is that true? Or did I imagine that?
I haven't checked the news, I tell you.
You're a busy man. But there was a tremor.
In that one.
There was a tremor. So, following on from the asteroid thing, there is a sliding scale of earthquakes. I mean, we think earthquake, and our brains are programmed to think, huge, massive, epic scenes of destruction. But in actual fact, quakes or minor quakes are happening all the time, correct?
Yes. Very true.
Is there a kind of... I mean, maybe this is just me, but I tend to think of volcanoes and earthquakes almost on the same plane because they're dealing with the same tectonic plate movement. Is that an oversimplification, or?
Well, the plates are moving, and well, that's fine because we need them to move. We need the magnetic field of Earth to protect us against solar wind. So well, that's part of nature. However, well, these movements and the scale of this problem is probably a lot bigger than an asteroid impact, because I think that prediction is worse in this case, because well, we could track an asteroid like hitting Earth, or at least getting close to Earth, like several decades in advance, perhaps, but actually an earthquake to predict, or a volcano eruption, I think that's less productive.
So we don't. I mean, but we do have warning systems. I mean, you mentioned last week when we were talking about the Tony Stark augmented reality stuff. You were saying that Japan is working on, after its very sad encounter with the tsunami earthquake style, that they're working on a defense system that's not only
the tsunami warning. You mean? Well, that's rather just a signaling system for the holograms, but it's not a prediction system, and I'm not aware of any long-term prediction solution for earthquakes or eruptions or any tectonic activity.
Is that because, in effect, earthquakes and volcanoes are a little bit like the weather? I mean, we can predict it up to a certain point, but
yeah, it's very complex, I guess.
Yeah. So is it that the mathematics of predicting, let alone controlling something like that, are just beyond us and always will be?
Yeah, I guess so. It's very complex. Also, the weather is very complex.
There are, however, technologies, I'm sure, and contingency plans in place for if we get another big one. I mean, there's the super volcano. What is it? Yellowstone? Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, well, there are the super volcanoes, which are, well, the big ones. Obviously in history, if we read about the topic, then there have been various supervolcano eruptions, and such eruptions really change the climate on a global scale, which could lead to our extinction literally. So if we don't die from the heat and from all the dust, then actually the global winter is going to kill us.
But that would have to be a super volcano, wouldn't it? Like an ordinary volcano eruption,
yes.
Like the one that happened about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. Or, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was
in Ireland.
Yeah.
Which stopped actually the air traffic.
Yeah. But I mean, the worst thing that happened as a result of that was that air traffic was disrupted for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, which is a local phenomenon, because it's not stopping air traffic globally. It's just in that area or on a continent or part of a continent.
So where does a normal volcano become a super volcano? What's the exact kind of distinction? Where does one become the other? Is it just in terms of impact or predicted impact, or is it actually in the physical makeup of it?
My expertise is not really into volcanoes, but the super volcanoes like in Yellowstone, it's just imagine a volcano, which is the size of nearly a continent, actually.
Holy shit!
And if that erupts, then we are really doomed.
Yeah, we are fuckhead. I didn't actually swear there because I had it in the ED, but basically, if that volcano goes up, that's it. So make your last goodbyes at that.
Yeah, then we better than just change planet or.
Well, I mean, and this is where space exploration. This is where the campaign for space exploration.
Whatever.
Yeah, well, who knows?
Right.
Yeah, but there's no. The important thing is there's nothing we can do about that. That happens. That's it. Bong. We're gone.
I don't know actually. I don't know about any. I haven't read.
My point is this: even if we're not
any
even if we're not killed by the lava, you're killed by the impact of it. As in, there would be, at best, there would be some sort of global meltdown in civilization as a result of something like that. Our climate would change rapidly. A large proportion of the civilized world will be wiped out because, let's face it, we are a very American-centric world. And if you take out, a chunk of the Americas, you would take out a chunk, by extension, of civilization. And
pretty sure it's the end of our civilization if we get a super volcano eruption.
Well, I mean, movie-wise, once again, it's one of those things that you get certain peaks and troughs and interest. There's certainly an earthquake movie coming out this summer with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, appropriately dealing with an earthquake, a guy called The Rock. It looks pretty formulaic in the sense that no doubt he's saving his daughter or his wife or both, or just trying to get from one to the other, because I think that's a good way in with heroes, and I'm sure it'll be entertaining nonsense as we simply wait for Avengers Age of Ultron and James Bond and Star Wars and all the big ones. In terms of volcanoes, there was one about a volcano in Los Angeles called, appropriately enough, Volcano, which has Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, have you seen that one?
Yes, I did, unfortunately.
Well, there's Tommy Lee Jones doing his come to the rescue bit, and he's very good at being a guy in control. If there were a crisis of that nature tomorrow, Tommy Lee Jones is the man you would really want at the helm. He's a no-nonsense, kind of a take command sort of a leader in the majority of his movies, actually. But I think what's interesting is that they don't have him as some volcano expert. They have him just as a normal, everyday cop, I think, who happens to be on duty when this happens. So once again, it's about the human response to it rather than the event itself. But then there's another one which I love called Dante's Peak, which is from, once again, it's from the same year, I think.
Yeah, I saw that one. I think that one is better, actually. I like that one better than the Tommy Lee version.
Yeah, I think they're more comfortable with it. It's got Pierce Brosnan again, so James Bond comes up again. Yep. At least it's not Dalton this time. Although, guess what Brosnan's name is in that film? He's called Harry Dalton. I know. It's just one of those weird coincidences. But as a movie, it's great because it deals with one town. It's not saying this volcano is going to wipe out the world, but it makes it very clear that if this were a worldwide phenomenon, you'd be frightened. And I think it captures the politics. Once again, we talked about the politics in terms of asteroids. There's a reluctance on the part of certain people to empty a town when a volcano is imminent, because they don't know if it's going to erupt and they're not sure. And of course they have the lone scientist hero, Pierce Brosnan, comes to the rescue. And Brosnan's very convincing as a volcanologist, in a way that perhaps some people didn't think he was as a top flight secret agent. He's very tender in it. He's very clearly passionate about his work, and they do show the danger of it. They don't shy away from it, but there is very much a sense that this is a physical job. It's both blue collar and white collar. They show that the scientists have to do some dangerous work. That it's dangerous just to look, even at an extinct volcano, is you've got to climb things. You can fall off, so you get the danger of the build up to it, and that's before any kind of eruption. You get the emotional intimacy of how a family reacts to it, and you get the bigger picture politics of it. So Dante's Peak, it's a little bit of a B movie. There is some melodrama to it, but yeah, it's from 1997. It's very typical of the time, and in a weird sort of a sentimental, not entirely objective way, I recommend it. I like it. What can I say? And you like it, so hey, what can we do? Okay, so if we do the sliding scale again, 1 to 10, we'll put volcanoes and earthquakes together just for the sake of brevity of time. You're going to put those pretty high up. 10. Are we looking at
I mean,
7?
volcanoes are well, an everyday threat, and the sad part of the situation is that lots of people are still living too close to volcanoes, which, well, because this problem was ignored, perhaps ignored. I don't know why. I don't get it really. In history, that they
Yeah.
yeah, they prayed to their gods or whatsoever, that they thought they could control really the volcano or just calm it down or whatever. But actually, well, modern people know very well that, well, there's not much we can do against it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're still.
It's better to move away from the volcanoes.
So we're going to go with. I don't want to frighten everybody. I don't want us to be blamed for an actual meltdown in civilization because we tell people the world's going to end. But that would be to flatter myself in terms of influence of this podcast already. But I would say we've got to be realistic and credible. We've got to be safe. Shall we say 5 if we're sort of combining the two together? It's going to happen.
It's more than 5 actually.
7?
I think it's a bigger threat. Well, let's split the problem. So supervolcano eruption. It's about the same like an asteroid impact, because, well, these things don't happen so often. Well, a volcano eruption, well, that's around 7, 8, let's say.
Holy shit.
I mean, well, it's not only Yellowstone Park with the supervolcano. I know another one. Probably there are more than I heard about them. Well, the one is actually under the sea, next to Naples, because we know about the Vesuv, which basically destroyed 2 Roman cities in history. But not that volcano is the real threat there, because that's a tiny one. But the supervolcano is lurking on the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
And we know that Naples is a giant city actually, and it's just next to the supervolcano. So if that erupts, then all big cities in that region will be immediately wiped out. There's really no chance to survive that.
It's sounding like a James Bond villain now. You said that with glee. They will immediately be wiped out. But then I just lapsed into Alan Partridge.
Quite quickly, I guess.
Yeah, you see, I'm using humour to really, well, not humour, but I'm using some sort of morbid sense of humour to try and detract from the fact that is actually quite scary. But like you say, if there's nothing you can do about it, there's nothing you can do about it. And really all you could do is hope to survive as best you can. And if you can't survive, I suppose, just make the best of what you've got in the meantime and get on with life, really. Which would be the Pierce Brosnan approach. One of the things about Pierce, just in case a lot of people were thinking that I was too biased towards Timothy Dalton, I think the admirable thing about Pierce Brosnan is that he's very much a get-on-with-it sort of a guy. I think he has very much a philosophy of just getting on with it. I think one of the reasons he's been such an enduring film star is because he's a hard worker and he just gets on with it. That was very much the philosophy, I think, to his Bond, and it was how it was a success. And I think that's why he's still a presence now on social media and in movies. And I think so. When in doubt, guys, if you're facing volcano, earthquake, etc., just think like Pierce. Just get on with it. Be suave and smooth and a very decent, hard-working bloke, and you'll survive somehow, probably. And if you don't, well, then there's the afterlife. And that's another podcast in itself. Obviously, we can't go on forever with this, but I think before we go into part 2 of it, if we sort of have a bridge part where we lead into the next part. Obviously, each and every one of these scenarios, well, is it scenarios, will lead into a possible solution. And I think there's very much a danger, certainly as I researched the piece that I wrote about it, that the solution can actually compound the problem. As in, man can be his own worst enemy. He can create something that is intended to improve or enhance his life and his work. And ultimately it ends up not so much directly destroying it, but certainly worsening some other problem. Is that philosophically a gross generalization about the darker side of science? But I mean, it is there, isn't it?
Do you mean that mankind destroys itself through science or through social disorder or destruction?
Well, both. And indeed, social disorder.
Could happen, both.
And a fear of disorder leading to extreme order. I mean, things like, it's a very weird feeling that we have at the moment in the world. But I mean, without being flippant about this, I mean, last week there were the very moving Holocaust commemorations, for example, and that's 6 million people wiped out by man, by a force of man, an unspeakable, unbelievable, organized, mobilized evil. And you contrast that with the almost cavalier attitude that is on display at the moment to, I don't know, to words like anti-Semitism or mass destruction and stuff like that. We throw these things into everyday speak without any comprehension of the fact that supposedly we've moved beyond them, and yet there's almost a desire at the moment to have a villain or a bad guy that can, I suppose, personify all of those things. And I think the real fear in mankind at the moment is that we don't have that. We know we've got all of the forces, all of the evils that have inspired organized evil in the past, still very much on display in the world. But we're getting them nowadays in little pockets. So it'll be one terror attack, or it will be one display of racial hatred, or it will be one, near wartime scrape that we have with another foreign power or something. So we're in this constant state of fear about what could happen, exactly like with the natural disasters, but this time with man-made stuff. And it's as though mankind is programmed to seek a constant balance between the order and the disorder. We like to have a threat, a villain. We like to put a face on evils that are by their very nature, I suppose, uncontrollable now, and chaotic rather than organized. As I say, I mean, we talk about Nazism or the communists or whoever it is in the past. Well, those were at least a villain that you could put a face on and a block on. We don't have that, I suppose, luxury so much anymore. So today, it's as though there's this balance between we want to avoid an end of the world scenario, but anytime there is something that happens in the world and unites the world through social media or something, on the one hand there's this enormous sense of relief that you're not touched by it, but there's almost a desire to be a part of that and to own it. And in many of the responses that are taken to these things, so for example there's the ongoing debate about we want to beat ISIS, we want to beat any kind of terror threat, but one of the ways to do that is to monitor things like social media and cut down to some extent on the civil liberties that people take for granted. Of course, you can use social media and so on, but the payoff is that it will be looked at. Ebola, for example, the fallout from that, no one wants to get it, but everyone wants to know about it, everyone wants to be protected by it, but equally people are frightened when the protection from that is draconian. So when the woman, I think, that poor nurse who got off the plane in New York, and she's quarantined, and the whole area is quarantined, everyone thinks, this is a draconian dictatorial response. Well, it's the draconian dictatorial response that's necessary, and to a certain extent that people have asked for, that they want. And I get the feeling that one of the real dangers in the world at the moment is that we could go either way. We could either face a chaotic threat that's worldwide and unchecked, or in our fear of that and in our desire to put a face on the threats that unite us, we inadvertently create a new villain that is a bloc, that is a mobilized military entity, even in the nuclear age. And indeed, especially in the nuclear age, that's particularly dangerous. Do you follow me, or is that too much of a ramble, a rant? Such as typical James speak.
I'm following you, James.
I mean, what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that when we've talked about science as a force, or scientists, I mean, we think of science, we think of rationality. But science is a tool. It's not just an aim, it's a method. And I think in the wrong hands, unchecked, or perhaps promoted irresponsibly, or dumbed down and not thought about respectably, it could be a force for destruction. Now, having had that serious moment of reflection, back to cinema for a second, this summer sees Jurassic World, which is the fourth Jurassic Park movie. It's taken them nearly 15 years to get a fourth one out. But the idea being that the genetic scientists they're simply doing what they're told by corporations, yeah? So if they're told to build a super mega dinosaur that splices the DNA of Velociraptor, T-Rex, and everything else, they'll make it. And people in their masses, because they're programmed, I suppose, in the social media era, which was worked into this Jurassic Park film, presumably, go to this park and knowing fully well that there's this psycho dinosaur on the loose. And of course something's going to go wrong with that. Avengers, Age of Ultron, which is coming out. Our old friend from last week, Tony Stark. He, without being a spoiler person here, the plot line is quite simple. He designs an artificial intelligence. And we'll go into AI, I think, next time, but he designs what's called an artificial intelligence designed to protect the world. The artificial intelligence, of course, becomes sentient and thinks, do you know what? The biggest threat to humans is humanity itself, so I'm going to wipe out humans. It's an ongoing theme. Terminator. There's a fifth Terminator coming out, Terminator Genesis, which has Arnold Schwarzenegger coming back, even though he's nearly 70. And they even explain that as that the robots, the flesh visage that they give to the robots ages just like a normal human's, which is why he looks the way he does. I think it's a great way around it. But once again, the idea being that Terminators began as a defense program to help bring order that went totally wrong. You don't even have to go, you don't have to look at cinema today. Go all the way back to literature. Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, stuff like that. These are books. Classic Gothic literature begins with the fear of science gone wrong. Science, a man-made force, designed ostensibly to combat natural threats in the service of science, in the service of civilization, which ultimately creates the opposite. Is that simply a product of the creative brain's natural paranoia and the need for artists to have ideas and villains? Or is it actually in our almost scientific DNA to have an appetite for creation, even if it entails destruction, and equally to be curious about destruction? I mean, I mentioned to you that kids go crazy at the idea of apocalypse. They love it. Is there something in humanity that's almost programmed to experiment with its own destruction to, I suppose, further its own survival?
It looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, are we perhaps our own worst enemy? That's what I'm saying. I mean, is humanity somehow, in its quest for scientific advancement, in its quest to avoid any kind of a threat that could be either a global killer or even just a society killer, more likely to inadvertently design something that is a real threat? Because I think one of the things that you gave me in the list of possible apocalypses to write in the articles, humanity wipes itself out. You weren't doing that flippantly, were you, Robert? You genuinely, as a scientist, might fear that.
This is a very dangerous century, probably the most dangerous one, because the knowledge of mankind is really rapidly growing. We can really change lots of stuff already. We can really influence basically our nature, our environment. We can destruct in ever larger scale. So if that's misused, then that could lead to the extinction of the race.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for me, one of the reasons I always wanted to be better at science, one of the reasons I regret not being a scientist, is the fact that, well, I'd like to think that it gives you a kind of a moral neutrality. If you're simply the guy that pushes the buttons, without demeaning what scientists do, but if you're simply the person entrusted with decoding,
they don't only push buttons.
Well,
come on.
I don't mean that literally, but what I mean is, if you're the guy who simply has to worry about is this pattern logically accurate, is the mathematics here correct, is this scientific procedure correct, that you're not therefore entrusted in terms of your professional life or in terms of your personal life of having to worry about the morality of it. But I think that's, in retrospect, a gross oversimplification on my part. I mean, the scientist is in fact the moral agent rather than and morality's last hope, maybe.
I don't really see
that. Do you feel a moral burden in your job? I mean, when you take on one of your R&D contracts, do you think, well, what's the morality of this, or do you just go for it?
Sometimes I do, but I don't see that hard contrast between scientists and the rest of the people, actually, because, all human beings are very curious. That's part of our nature, and that curiosity actually leads to new discoveries and developments. Actually, we want to make things better.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is kind of a kind of a natural built-in goal of the universe, that when life appears, but that's not even a theory. I say just it's a really weird idea now, but I could imagine that kind of a goal or something. What happens in the universe, that when life appears and it becomes intelligent, and it starts to understand, and it's really hungry for knowledge. To understand itself, actually, because it's part of the universe.
So clearly what we've got is a situation whereby we've got...
So it's really unstoppable. So even if you have scientists, I mean, all humans are scientists. But some people dedicate their whole life and every day on discovering and understanding stuff, and then there are people who deal with different things, and they just really can allocate minimal time. Let's say just reading a book or a news article, like once a month. But they are all actually scientists. We are all scientists.
Yeah, was it? I mean, I would love to be able to call myself a scientist, and maybe deep down I can. I'd like to think of myself as one, but we always like to, I think, admire the things that we're sort of not quite there with, and I think the people who are there with it are kind of more laid back about it. It's like if I talk to army officers. I have a very good friend who's an army officer, and I will be in awe of the fact that he's an army officer, and he will point out to me, well, that's because you were a civilian. If you were an army officer, there would be that element of just getting on with it, which goes back to our philosophy of earlier on, which is get on with it, which is pretty much all you can do, be it as a scientist or anybody else. But I think what's interesting is, as we wrap up here, is that there is a theme here, which is that our way in was the idea of nature and mankind being two separate agents of possible destruction of the Earth. The more I think about it now, and having talked about it with you, is the idea that man's a part of that. Man will respond to it, and he will respond to it either with chaos and panic or excessive draconian force, which in turn creates new threats, i.e. man is a part of the cycle of nature. He is an agent of nature, and his responses to threats are themselves a kind of a threat, which I think is interesting. I mean, it doesn't make for comforting thought, but it does make for a more, I think, logical and rational approach to dealing with the possible end of the world, to the extent that one can be perhaps more calm and pragmatic about it. And as I say, I think it's important to remember that there is a flippant side to this. And I realise I haven't yet mentioned Gwyneth Paltrow or Leia Seydoux. Whoops, I just did. What can I say? It's not the end of the world. It's just a podcast. All right. On that note, Robert, thank you very much. We'll pick that up in a week if we are still here, if the world hasn't ended, or if people haven't actually wrote in and had us, locked up by the Secret Service or something for our intimate knowledge of the end of days that we have discussed here. But we shall see. And fingers crossed that we do get that. Thank you, listeners. As I say, keep your comments and questions coming in. Keep looking at the website, whatisuniverse.com, the Twitter page, the Reddits, if you can find us in those subreddits, please do, and the Facebook page, of course, and the Google+. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great week. I've been James Murphy and with Robert Sugar. Thanks, Robert. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.